The desert doesn't forgive mistakes, and it doesn't forget blood. 48 Rangers learned this on a Tuesday morning in Helmand Province, when what should have been a simple extraction turned into a nightmare written in tracer fire and dust. They'd been sent to pull out a CIA asset from a compound 3 clicks north of Marja, but intelligence had missed something crucial. The compound was surrounded, not by a few scattered fighters, but by a coordinated force that had been waiting, watching, preparing. The Rangers hit the ground at 5:47 hours, fast-roped from their Chinooks into what their commander, Captain Marcus Webb, would later describe as walking into a meat grinder with a blindfold on. Within 90 seconds, both helicopters were forced to pull back under withering RPG fire, leaving the team stranded in a kill zone with no cover and 360 degrees of hate coming at them from hardened fighting positions. The radio chatter that morning was the kind that makes colonels go gray. Webb's voice, usually steady as granite, cracked just slightly when he called it in. "Darkstar Maine, this is Ranger 17. We are in heavy contact all sides. 2 wounded, ammunition critical. We need immediate CAS, how copy?" The response came back clipped, professional, but everyone listening could hear what wasn't being said. The nearest jets were 20 minutes out, and 20 minutes might as well be 20 years. The Rangers had maybe 10. They'd taken shelter in a dried irrigation ditch that offered concealment but no real protection. Rounds snapping overhead so thick it sounded like a nest of angry hornets. Blood mixed with ancient mud. Men who'd trained for years to never show fear pressed themselves flat against earth that had seen 10,000 years of war. Then someone at Bagram Air Base made a call that would ripple through military legend for years to come. The duty officer scrolled through his tactical display, looking for anyone who might reach the Rangers before the inevitable happened. One identifier blinked on his screen: Hog 61, an A-10 Thunderbolt on a routine patrol 40 miles south. Solo bird. Pilot had been up for 3 hours already, hunting for targets of opportunity along a highway route. The officer clicked his mic. "Hog 61, Darkstar Maine. We have troops in contact, urgent CAS request, 48 souls, ammunition black, how copy?" The response that came back was calm, almost eerily so, with just the faintest trace of a southern accent smoothing out the edges. "Darkstar, Hog 61 copies all. Send coordinates, I'm coming." The duty officer sent the grid. Then he pulled up the pilot's file, something he almost never did during active missions. Call sign, Revenant. Real name, Lieutenant Colonel Cale Ashford. Age, 37. Flight hours, 2200. Combat sorties, 143. But it was the next line that made him pause, made him wonder if he just sent a miracle or a controversy into the worst firefight of the month. The pilot of Hog 61 was a woman, and in some corners of the Air Force, that still mattered to people who should have known better. Cale Ashford didn't hear the doubt. She only heard the math. 40 miles at 450 knots, 6 minutes if she pushed it. She nosed the A-10 over and felt the GS press her into her seat as the desert blurred beneath her. The Warthog wasn't graceful. It never had been. Built around a 7-barrel Gatling gun that could spit 30mm rounds through tank armor, the A-10 looked like something designed by someone who'd forgotten that planes were supposed to be pretty. Stubby wings. Engines mounted high on the fuselage like afterthoughts. A cockpit wrapped in a titanium bathtub, because the designers knew this jet would take hits and keep flying. Cale loved every ugly inch of it. She'd been flying A-10s for 14 years, ever since she'd walked away from an F-16 track that everyone said was more prestigious, more career-enhancing. But Cale hadn't joined the Air Force for prestige. She joined because her older brother, a Marine infantryman, had bled out in Fallujah waiting for air support that came 11 minutes too late. 11 minutes. She'd promised herself she'd never let that happen to someone else's brother. The A-10 was slow, outdated, and perpetually on the chopping block for budget cuts, but it could loiter over troops for hours and put ordnance exactly where it needed to go. That was the mission. That was the only thing that mattered. Her weapons display showed a full combat load: 2 Mavericks, 4 500-pound JDAMs, 750 rounds for the GAU-8 cannon, and 2 AIM-9 sidewinders for self-defense. She checked her fuel, 60%. Enough for 30 minutes of combat time, maybe 40 if she was smart about it. Her right engine was running rough, had been since takeoff, but still putting out 92% thrust. She made a mental note of it and kept flying. The GPS counted down the distance. 30 miles, 25-20. The radio crackled with Webb's voice again, this time directed at her. Hog 6-1, Ranger 1-7. We are approximately 800 meters north of checkpoint Delta 7. Danger close situation, friendlies in a ditch running east-west, enemy in structures and tree lines on all sides. We are taking effective fire from multiple PKM positions and at least 2 SBG-9 recoilless rifles. How copy? Good copy, Ranger 1-7, Kale replied, her voice steady, almost conversational. I'll be overhead in 90 seconds. Sit tight. I've got you. She armed her weapons systems and began her descent, dropping from 8,000 feet to 3,000, low enough to see details, low enough to be effective. The desert sprawled below her in shades of brown and tan, broken by green irrigation channels and clusters of mud brick compounds. Then she saw it. A thin line of men pressed into a ditch, and around them, muzzle flashes sparking from a dozen different positions. The enemy had them boxed in perfectly. Kale's first pass was reconnaissance. She overflew the target area at 300 knots, eyes scanning, brain processing, building a three-dimensional map of the battlefield. She saw the Rangers, tight and disciplined even under fire. She saw the enemy fighters, some in covered positions, others moving in the open, confident that they had the advantage. They hadn't heard her yet. The A-10's engines were surprisingly quiet from the ground, especially compared to the roar of an F-16 or the scream of an F-18. She keyed her radio. Ranger 1-7, Hog 6-1. I've got eyes on. I'm going to start with the structures northwest of your position, then work the tree line to your south. Keep your heads down. Webb's response was immediate. Hawk 6-1, be advised we have friendlies within 200 meters of those targets. Danger close. Kale smiled, though no one could see it behind her visor. Danger close was where the A-10 lived. Roger that. I'll make it count. She pulled the Warthog into a steep bank, bleeding off speed, lining up her first run. The targeting pod painted a laser on a 2-story compound where she could see fighters moving on the roof. She selected a GBU-12, a 500-pound laser-guided bomb, and pickled it off. The weapon fell cleanly, tracking the laser, and impacted the structure dead center. The explosion was a bloom of orange and black, and the building collapsed inward like a kicked sandcastle. Secondary explosions followed, ammunition cooking off. The radio erupted with cheers from the Rangers. Kale didn't celebrate. She was already lining up her next target, a tree line where muzzle flashes had been persistent. This one was closer to the friendlies, within 150 meters. No room for error. She switched to the gun, the GAU-8 Avenger, the massive cannon that gave the A-10 its infamous sound. She centered the pipper on the tree line, adjusted for wind, and squeezed the trigger. The gun roared to life with a sound like the sky tearing itself apart. BRRRRRRT. A 1-second burst that sent 70 rounds of depleted uranium downrange. The tree line erupted in dust and splintered wood. The muzzle flashes stopped. Webb's voice came through again, but this time there was something different in it, something like hope. Good hits, Hog 6-1, keep it coming. Kale pulled into another turn, scanning for the next threat. That's when her master caution light flared red and an alarm screamed in her headset. Her right engine was failing. The gauges showed oil pressure dropping, exhaust gas temperature spiking. A catastrophic failure, the kind that grounded planes or killed pilots. She shut down the engine immediately, running through the emergency procedures from memory, her hands moving with practiced precision. The A-10 shuddered slightly, then steadied. One engine gone, one still running. She checked her fuel again, 45%. She did the math in her head. With one engine, her loiter time was cut in half. Maybe 15 minutes of combat left, maybe less. She could turn back. She could declare an emergency, head for Bagram, and let someone else finish the mission. That would be the safe call, the textbook call, but the Rangers didn't have 15 minutes, they had now. Kale leveled off, trimmed the aircraft for single-engine flight, and keyed her radio. Ranger 17, Hog 61, be advised I've lost an engine. I'm staying on station. Give me your next target. There was a pause, a long one. Then Webb's voice, quieter now, almost reverent. Hog 61, are you sure? Kale didn't hesitate. Affirmative. I've got enough gas, and one engine is more than some people need to get the job done. Now give me a target before I find one myself. Later, much later, Webb would tell reporters that was the moment he knew they were going to make it out. Not because of the bombs or the gun runs that followed, though those were devastating, but because of the voice on the other end of that radio, calm and certain and completely unafraid. It was like having God's own guardian angel up there, he'd say. Except this one flew an A-10 and had a drawl that could put you to sleep if she wasn't busy saving your life. But that was later. In the moment, there was only the mission. Kale made 4 more gun runs, each one more precise than the last. She worked methodically, starting from the furthest enemy positions and collapsing their perimeter inward, always keeping the Rangers at the center of a shrinking safe zone. She used her remaining Maverick missiles on 2 technical trucks that were trying to maneuver for a better angle. The missiles struck with pinpoint accuracy, turning the vehicles into flaming wrecks. Her fuel gauge dropped steadily, 30%, 25, 20. The single engine was drinking gas faster than she'd calculated, working overtime to keep the heavy jet in the air. The enemy fighters began to realize what was happening. They weren't just taking casualties, they were being systematically destroyed by something they couldn't effectively fight back against. A few of them fired RPGs at her, and Kale saw the smoke trails arc up toward her, lazy and unthreatening from her altitude. She jinked left, then right, and the rockets passed harmlessly by. The A-10 could take a beating. It had been designed to, but she preferred not to test that particular feature if she could avoid it. She keyed her radio again. Ranger 17, how's your situation? Webb's response was faster now, more energized. Hawk 61, enemy fire is slackening. We've got movement to the east, looks like they're falling back. Kale checked her ammunition. 200 rounds left for the gun, 1 JDAM. Fuel at 18%. She made a decision. Roger, I'm going to make 1 more gun run on the eastern positions, then I need to head home. Fast movers are 2 minutes out to take over. Can you hold for 2 minutes? Webb laughed, an actual laugh, rough and relieved. Ma'am, after what you just did, we can hold for 2 hours. You go ahead and get that bird home safe. Kale set up her final run, lining up on a cluster of fighters who were trying to retreat through an open field. This was the shot she wanted, them in the open, nowhere to hide. She put the pipper on the lead element, adjusted slightly for their movement, and held the trigger down for a full 2 seconds. The gun sang its terrible song, and the field became a hell of dust and blood and screaming metal. When the dust settled, nothing was moving. Kale pulled up hard, her single engine straining, and turned southeast toward Bagram. Her fuel gauge read 15%. Warning lights blinked across her dash like Christmas in July. The stick felt mushy in her hand, the hydraulics struggling. But the jet was flying, and that was all that mattered. She checked in with Darkstar Maine, reported her status, and was immediately given priority routing and a straightened approach to Bagram. The tower cleared all other traffic. She was too low on fuel for a normal pattern, too crippled for anything fancy. She'd get 1 chance at the runway, and if she missed it, she'd have to eject over the base and let the jet crash wherever physics decided. She ran through her landing checklist by rote, forcing herself to focus on procedures instead of adrenaline. Gear down. Flaps down, speed stable at 140 knots, fuel at 10%. The runway appeared ahead, a long stripe of salvation cutting through the desert. She adjusted her glide path, fought a slight crosswind, and brought the Warthog down with a grace that belied its brutish appearance. The wheels kissed the concrete, the jet settled, and she deployed the drag chute. The rolled to a stop with 3% fuel remaining. Kale sat in the cockpit for a moment after shutdown, her hands still on the controls, her breath coming in slow, measured pulls. The adrenaline was fading now, replaced by the bone-deep exhaustion that always followed combat. She could hear the fire trucks approaching, the ground crew shouting to each other, but it all seemed distant, muffled. She closed her eyes and thought about 48 men who would go home to their families because she'd chosen to stay instead of run. That was the job. That was always the job. When she climbed down from the cockpit, the ground crew chief took one look at the right engine and whistled low. "Colonel, I don't know how you landed this thing. That engine is cooked. You're lucky it didn't seize up or catch fire." Cale glanced at the charred, oil-streaked turbine and shrugged. "Luck had nothing to do with it. The jet did what it was built to do, and so did I." The chief shook his head, grinning. "Yes, ma'am. Remind me never to play poker with you." She walked to the debriefing alone, as she always did, her flight suit stained with sweat and dust. No one cheered. No one saluted. The base went about its business because that's what military bases do. They keep moving forward, mission to mission, day to day. But word was already spreading, the way it always does in the military, through back channels and radio chatter and emails marked after action report. The Rangers were safe. All 48. And the pilot who'd saved them had done it on one engine with enough fuel left to fill a coffee cup. Within 6 hours, the story had reached the Pentagon. Within 12, it was on the news, though they left out her name at her request. She didn't do it for recognition. She did it because 11 minutes had been too long for her brother, and she'd be damned if she let anyone else wait that long ever again. But recognition found her anyway, the way it always does. 3 days later, she was called into the wing commander's office. Colonel Richard Haynes was a career officer, old-school Air Force, a man who'd flown F-15s in Desert Storm and had opinions about who belonged in a cockpit. He gestured for her to sit, and she did, her posture perfect, her expression neutral. Haynes studied her for a long moment before speaking. "Colonel Ashford, I've been reading the after-action reports from Helmand. Quite a show you put on." Cale kept her eyes forward. "Just doing my job, sir." Haynes leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. "Your job was to provide close air support. Your job was not to stay on station with a failed engine and critically low fuel." Cale met his gaze evenly. "With respect, sir, my job was to keep those Rangers alive. I accomplished that mission." A silence stretched between them, tense and weighted. Then Haynes smiled just slightly. "Yes, you did. And because of that, I've been instructed to forward your name for a Distinguished Flying Cross." "Congratulations, Colonel. You've earned it, even if you'll probably hate the ceremony." He was right. She did hate the ceremony. 2 weeks later, she stood in a hangar at Bagram while a general she'd never met pinned a medal to her chest and said words about valor and heroism and dedication. The Rangers were there, all 48 of them, standing in formation, their faces clean-shaven and their uniforms pressed. When the general finished talking, Captain Webb stepped forward and saluted her. It was a crisp, perfect salute, the kind you give to someone you'd follow into fire. Cale returned it, and for a moment the hangar was silent except for the distant hum of aircraft engines. After the ceremony, Webb approached her. Up close, she could see the faint lines around his eyes, the kind that came from too many deployments and too little sleep. "Colonel Ashford," he said, his voice formal, "my men and I wanted to thank you properly. We've been trying to think of the right words, but—" He trailed off, and one of his sergeants handed him something. It was a patch custom-made with an image of an A-10 silhouetted against a red sky. Below it, a single word: Revenant. Webb held it out to her. "We looked up your call sign. A revenant is someone who comes back from the dead, but it also means someone who comes back to settle accounts. That's what you did for us, ma'am. You came back when everyone else thought we were finished, and you settled the account. So if it's all the same to you, we'd like you to have this. Our way of saying you're one of us now." Cale took the patch, her throat tight. She wasn't usually emotional. Combat had burned that out of her years ago, but this was different. This was 48 men who knew exactly what she'd risked and were saying it mattered. She looked at Webb, then at the Rangers behind him, and nodded. "Thank you. I'll wear it with pride." And she did, velcroed to her flight suit, right over her heart on every mission afterward. But the story didn't end there. Stories like this never do. They ripple outward, touching people and places far beyond the original event. A journalist embedded with a forward operating base heard about the mission and wrote an article that went viral, shared 10,000 times in the first day. The headline read, "Female A-10 pilot saves 48 Rangers on one engine." The article was detailed, well-written, and mostly accurate, but it ignited a firestorm of debate in comment sections and social media. Some praised her as a hero. Others questioned whether a woman should be flying combat missions at all. Still others suggested that the story was exaggerated, that she'd had help, that the Rangers would have been fine without her. Kale didn't read the comments. She'd learned long ago that the opinions of strangers on the internet had no bearing on reality, but others read them and they responded. One of the Rangers, a corporal named Danny Ortiz, posted a video on YouTube. He sat in front of a shaky phone camera, still in Afghanistan, and spoke for 3 minutes. "I keep seeing people say that Colonel Ashford's story is overblown or that we didn't really need her. So let me make this real simple. I was in that ditch. I watched my buddies get hit. I watched rounds snapping over our heads so close I could feel the heat. And I watched that A-10 come in and tear apart the people who were trying to kill us. She didn't have to stay. She had every reason to turn around and save herself. But she stayed. And because she stayed, I'm recording this video instead of being in a body bag. So to everyone questioning her, questioning whether she belongs in that cockpit, I've got a message. She earned it. She earned it 48 times over. And if you've got a problem with that, you can come to Afghanistan and tell me to my face." The video got 2 million views in a week. It changed the conversation. Slowly, reluctantly, even the skeptics began to acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, competence mattered more than gender. But old prejudices die hard, and Kale knew that one mission, no matter how successful, wouldn't erase decades of institutional bias. She'd faced it her entire career. The subtle doubts, the whispered comments, the feeling that she had to be twice as good to be considered half as competent. She'd learned to ignore it, to let her performance speak for itself. And her performance was undeniable. She flew 32 more combat missions that deployment, each one executed with the same precision and calm that had defined the Helmand rescue. She destroyed enemy armor, provided overwatch for convoys, and conducted armed reconnaissance along hostile borders. She never lost a friendly, not once. Her squadron mates began to call her the Guardian, though she told them to stop. "I'm just a pilot," she'd say, "same as any of you," but they knew better. They saw the way she flew, the way she thought 3 steps ahead of the enemy, the way she stayed cool when everyone else was losing their minds. She was something special, and they were proud to fly with her. When her deployment ended, she rotated back to the States, to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona, home of the 355th Fighter Wing and the largest concentration of A-10s in the Air Force. She expected to slip back into routine, training flights, evaluations, maybe a staff job that would bore her to tears. Instead, she was offered a position as the Director of Operations for the 354th Fighter Squadron. It was a leadership role, one that would take her out of the cockpit more often than she liked, but it came with the opportunity to shape how the next generation of A-10 pilots trained and fought. She accepted. The first time she stood in front of her new squadron, she saw the same mix of reactions she'd seen her entire career. Some faces showed respect. Others showed skepticism. A few showed outright hostility, the kind that came from people who thought women didn't belong in combat roles, let alone leadership positions. Kale didn't flinch. She looked at each of them in turn, then spoke. "I know what some of you are thinking. You're wondering if I earned this position or if I got it because of politics or publicity. So let me make this easy. I don't care what you think about me personally. I care about whether you can fly, fight, and bring your jet home in one piece. If you can do that, we'll get along fine. If you can't, I'll make sure you find a new career." Questions. One hand went up, belonging to a young captain with a cocky smirk. "Ma'am, is it true you stayed on station with one engine?" Kale nodded. "Yes, it is." The captain's smirk faded. "Did you ever think about turning back?" Kale considered the question, then answered honestly. "For about 3 seconds. Then I remembered why I fly this jet. Next question." No other hands went up. The squadron went to work, and slowly, grudgingly, they learned what the Rangers already knew. Cale Ashford was the real deal. Over the next year, she transformed the squadron. She implemented new training protocols focused on close air support in complex environments. She pushed for more realistic scenarios, more integration with ground forces, more emphasis on communication and precision. She flew with every pilot in the squadron, evaluating their skills, identifying their weaknesses, helping them improve. She was demanding, exacting, and relentless. But she was also fair, and she never asked anyone to do something she wouldn't do herself. The squadron's performance improved dramatically. Their scores on evaluations went up. Their confidence went up. And slowly, the skeptics became believers. One of those skeptics was a major named Travis Killian, a cocky F-16 pilot who'd been reassigned to the A-10 community against his will. He thought the Warthog was obsolete, a relic that should have been retired years ago. He made no secret of his disdain, complaining loudly in the squadron bar about how he'd been sentenced to fly a plane that was older than he was. Cale heard the complaints and said nothing, at least not at first. She waited until they were scheduled to fly together on a training mission, a simulated close air support scenario with ground controllers. The mission was straightforward: respond to a troops in contact call, identify enemy positions, and engage without hitting friendlies. Killian went first, flying his A-10 with the aggressive high-speed tactics he'd learned in the F-16. He made his gun runs too fast, too high, and his rounds impacted 200 meters off target. The ground controller called him off, frustration evident in his voice. Hog 2-3, you're off target. Friendlies are still taking fire. Adjust and re-attack. Killian swore under his breath, looped around, and tried again. This time he was closer but still not precise enough. The controller called him off again. Then it was Cale's turn. She came in low and slow, 300 feet above the ground at 200 knots, the way the A-10 was meant to be flown. She identified the target, confirmed with the controller, and made a single gun run that put every round exactly where it needed to go. The controller's voice came back immediately. Hog 6-1, good hits. Threat eliminated. Outstanding work. Cale keyed her mic. Roger. Hog 6-1 is off target, RTB. She glanced at her radar display, saw Killian following her back to base, and smiled to herself. After they landed, Killian found her in the debrief room. He looked humbled, a rare expression for him. Colonel, I owe you an apology. I've been an ass about this jet and about you, but I get it now. This thing isn't about speed or flash, it's about precision and patience, and you've got both. Cale nodded, accepting the apology. Major, the A-10 is a tool. Like any tool, it's only as good as the person using it. You're a good pilot. You just need to learn how to be a good A-10 pilot. That takes time and humility. Think you can manage that? Killian grinned. Yes, ma'am, I'll do my best. He did. 6 months later, Killian was one of the squadron's top performers, and he credited Cale with teaching him how to think like a Warthog pilot. She broke me down and built me back up, he told a fellow pilot. And I'm a better officer because of it. Stories like that spread, and Cale's reputation grew. She became known not just as a skilled pilot, but as a mentor, someone who could take raw talent and shape it into something exceptional. Young pilots requested assignments to her squadron. Senior officers sought her advice. And slowly, the Air Force began to realize that maybe they'd been underestimating her all along. Then came the phone call that changed everything. It was late on a Friday evening, and Cale was in her office reviewing flight schedules for the next week. Her phone rang, displaying a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Colonel Ashford. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and unmistakably high-ranking. Colonel, this is General Patricia Whitmore, Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations. Do you have a few minutes to talk? Cale sat up straighter, her mind racing. A 3-star general didn't call a lieutenant colonel on a Friday night unless it was important. Yes, ma'am. Of course. General Whitmore got straight to the point. Colonel, we've been watching your career with great interest. Your performance in Afghanistan, your work with the 354th, your reputation among your peers, it's all exemplary. We're considering you for a position at the Pentagon, working on the future of close air support doctrine. It would mean a promotion to full colonel and a significant increase in responsibility. Are you interested? Cale's first instinct was to say no. The Pentagon was a world of politics and PowerPoint, far removed from the cockpit and the mission. But then she thought about the bigger picture. If she could influence doctrine, she could shape how future pilots trained and fought. She could ensure that the lessons she'd learned, about precision, about staying when others would run, about valuing the mission above all else, would be passed down to the next generation. Ma'am, I'm interested. When would this start? The general's voice warmed slightly. We're targeting a start date in 3 months. That gives you time to transition your current duties and complete some preparatory courses. We'll send you the details. Welcome aboard, Colonel. The call ended, and Cale sat in silence, processing what had just happened. She'd spent her entire career in the cockpit, and now she was being asked to leave it behind, at least partially. It felt like stepping off a cliff. But she'd stepped off cliffs before, and she'd always found a way to fly. 3 months later, she reported to the Pentagon, trading her flight suit for a service dress uniform and her squadron for a staff position in the Operations Directorate. The transition was jarring. Instead of flying, she sat in meetings. Instead of immediate, tangible results, she worked on documents and strategies that might not bear fruit for years. But she approached it the way she approached everything, with focus, discipline, and an unwavering commitment to the mission. She fought for funding to keep the A-10 in service, arguing that its capabilities were irreplaceable in the close air support role. She pushed for better integration between air and ground forces, using her own experience to illustrate the importance of communication and trust. And she mentored young officers, especially women, who looked at her and saw proof that they belonged. One of those young officers was a first lieutenant named Maya Reeves, an A-10 pilot fresh out of training. Maya had heard the stories about Cale everyone had, and she was intimidated and inspired in equal measure. When she learned that Colonel Ashford was giving a briefing at the Pentagon, she found a way to attend, sitting in the back row trying to be invisible. But after the briefing, Cale sought her out as if she'd known Maya was there. "Lieutenant Reeves," Cale said, extending her hand. "I've heard good things about you. Top of your class at Tucson, excellent marks on your qualification rides. How are you finding the Warthog?" Maya shook her hand, trying not to stammer. It's everything I hoped it would be, ma'am, but it's also harder than I expected. There's so much to learn, so much to process in the moment." Cale nodded, understanding. "That's normal. The A-10 is an unforgiving jet. It demands precision and patience. But if you give it those things, it'll take care of you. And it'll let you take care of the people on the ground, which is the whole point." Maya hesitated, then asked the question she'd been dying to ask. "Ma'am, is it true that you stayed on station in Helmand with one engine?" Cale smiled, a rare, genuine smile. "Yes, it's true, but that's not the important part of the story. The important part is that I stayed because the mission required it and because I trusted my training and my jet. That's what I want you to remember, Lieutenant. Your gender doesn't matter in the cockpit. Your skill does. Your decisions do. Your willingness to do the hard thing when it's necessary, that's what matters. Focus on that and you'll be fine." Maya nodded, her eyes bright. "Thank you, ma'am." "I won't let you down." Cale squeezed her shoulder gently. "I know you won't. Now go fly." Years passed. Cale continued her work at the Pentagon, shaping policy and doctrine, mentoring the next generation. She never stopped flying, though her opportunities to do so became rarer. She'd take leave and return to Davis-Monthan, slipping into a cockpit and relearning the feel of the stick, the roar of the engines, the way the Earth looked from 3,000 feet. It was her therapy, her reminder of why she'd started this journey in the first place. And every time she flew, she thought about her brother, about the Rangers, about all the people she'd kept safe over the years. That was her legacy, more than any medal or promotion. Then on a cold November morning, she received word that Captain Marcus Webb, the Ranger commander she'd saved in Helmand, had been killed in action in Syria. An IED had torn through his vehicle during a routine patrol, killing him and two of his men instantly. The news hit Kale like a physical blow, even though she'd known the risks, even though she'd lost people before. Webb had been a good officer, a good man, someone who'd understood the bond between air and ground forces in a way few did. She attended his funeral at Arlington National Cemetery, standing in the cold rain with hundreds of others who'd known him, loved him, served with him. After the service, she was approached by Webb's widow, a quiet woman named Emily who held their young son's hand. Emily looked at Cale with red-rimmed eyes and said, "You're Colonel Ashford, aren't you? Marcus talked about you all the time. He said you were the reason he got to meet his son, the reason he got to come home that year. Thank you for giving us that time." Cale's throat tightened and she pulled Emily into a gentle hug. "He was a brave man. I'm sorry for your loss." Emily pulled back, wiping her eyes, then reached into her purse and pulled out something small and worn. It was the patch the Rangers had given Cale years ago, the one with the A-10 and the word Revenant. "Marcus kept this in his desk," Emily said. "He told me that if anything ever happened to him, I should find you and give it back. He said it belonged to you, that